Hello, thank you for joining us. I hope you're all doing well. I'm here once again with Jason Kavanagh, and we're going to be talking about music. And today, specifically, we're going to be talking about music education. Before we start this, I'm just going to start by introducing myself briefly. My name is Charles Kitchu. I'm a guitarist and a music teacher currently living and working in Luxembourg. And I'll let Jason introduce himself.
Hey everyone, I'm Jason Kavanagh. I'm also a musician and guitar teacher. I live in Canterbury in the UK, and that's where I'm based and that's where I'm teaching from.
And today's actually a very special one because we are in the same room.
Yeah.
Because normally that's not the case. If you've listened to this before, normally we're doing it over video call, as Jason obviously lives in the UK. Today we are actually both in Luxembourg, so we've been able to have a bit of a music session, and we thought that we'd try to record this discussion. So as I said, we're going to be talking about music in education, as both of us are music teachers, or you said guitar teachers. Is there like a distinction that you draw there?
Well, a little bit, because I guess we're more geared towards just teaching our instrument. Although I guess I should mention as well that I think this is the same for you, is that you offer sort of music theory lessons as well.
Absolutely.
So there is that element as well. But yeah, I would say it differs slightly. It's not like in a sort of classroom setting where you're teaching, you know, specifics of music theory and the history of music. It's more geared towards, teaching an instrument.
Right, yeah. Okay, yeah, absolutely, I understand that. So tell us a little bit about what you do, so when you're teaching in the UK.
Well, I guess how it works for me is like I'm a self-employed musician, so I mostly teach, but I also perform a little bit as well and do gigs and stuff and play with singers. But for the most part, it's sort of a self-employed job where, as you know, we just sort of do freelance work, do private tuition, private guitar lessons, as opposed to like a classroom setting. And I guess that's the fundamentals of the job, really. You either host lessons or go to different people's houses to teach them there.
And what do you normally teach? Is there like a particular style that you sort of specialise in, or are you more of a kind of generalist?
I think this is one of the things that we're going to get into a little bit, is that I personally just teach mostly the styles that I'm strongest with. So that is to say classical and jazz. Those are my sort of areas. Mm-hmm. But obviously with guitar and other instruments as well, it's, there's so much variety that you kind of have to be at least a little bit competent in like a variety of styles. So
absolutely.
I would say I kind of focus on, and I advertise that I kind of focus on classical and jazz, and most of my students are interested in that. That's why they came to me. But I'm open to teaching anything within my sort of capacity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about if that's the same for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think you're right to say, about the guitar. It's so versatile. We were talking about this the other day, and you find it in almost all sorts of music from all around the world. So it's kind of quite interesting when you have somebody, a prospective student, kind of approaching you and saying you want to learn the guitar, because there's then so many questions that need to be asked, because you need to find the path which is right for someone. Because you can play hundreds of different styles. You want to play sort of classical stuff you're talking about there, because if you start with that, that's an absolutely different approach to if you wanted to play pop or rock or blues.
Absolutely. I think that's most of the time students will come to, like, it depends on the student, but a lot of the time they will come to you with a sort of vague idea of the direction they want to go in.
Sure.
So I don't know if you found that as well. So
I found that. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah,
I found that more with adults.
Yeah.
Because they have like a clearer vision. They've obviously been listening to music for a long time, and they decided that they want to be involved with that and start, making the music. With children, I think sometimes the path is a lot less clear.
Yeah.
So there I really tend to just cover the basics, get them introduced to music and kind of how that works. And then, if they are showing a certain, if they are interested in something, we can perhaps start to move in a specific direction, or perhaps their parents are interested in them learning a certain sort. But in terms of what I teach normally, I teach a lot, much like you. I teach a bit of jazz, and but I also do teach a lot of general kind of guitar. When I say general guitar, I'm talking more sort of pop, rock, blues. And I think this is perhaps where our sort of experiences differ, at least from what I understand when we talked about it in the past, is I have a lot of people who come to me who want to learn that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, you haven't had so much interest perhaps because you put yourself out there more as a
Yeah.
specialist in.
It's interesting because I don't know if that's the specific reason or if it just so happens to be the case. But most of my students, I would say they're not like absolute beginners, and they do kind of have more specific ideas of what they kind of want to work on. So, in that sense, to be honest, none of my students really are at the stage where I'm sort of having to show them the basics of like how to hold the guitar, how to, where to put your hands, how to hold yourself when you're playing the guitar and all that sort of stuff.
So they've already a bit experienced, they kind of know what they're doing, and they sort of chosen a path that they want to kind of go down.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But I guess from what it sounds like, you have well, certainly more than I do, some students who are just sort of at the beginning of their
absolutely
experience.
Absolutely. I have a bit of a range of students at the moment, which is good to kind of, keeps things interesting. I think I do have a few people who are at the beginning stages of the guitar, and then also people who are perhaps a bit more experienced and they've been playing for a while and they have specific things that they want to kind of change or improve about their playing. But yes, I do tend to have quite a few beginner players.
See, that's what I'm kind of interested to hear about, is because I haven't really experienced that myself, so I just wonder what that's like for you as a very experienced guitarist, and a very competent, how it is going, teaching someone, pretty much the basics from the very start, how that is, because I haven't really experienced that myself.
Sure, well, that's a good question. I think at the beginning, there was a lot of thought that had to go into it. Because as I'm sure you can kind of emphasize, it's like you learn all this stuff, you spend ages, years kind of getting it down, and then you kind of forget that you've learned it, So it's kind of like you're doing things and you're not really conscious about, I'm moving my finger here, or I'm moving, doing this with my arm. It's just kind of your muscle memory takes over, and you just kind of remembered it because you've done it before. So at the beginning, when I first started teaching, there was a lot that I had to go back and really think about, like really minute things which probably don't even come into the mind of people who've been playing for a while. How do I hold the pick? How is my arm positioned? How do I put the guitar on my lap? How do I physically hold it on my body? These kind of things which are just not in your thought process at the moment, at least not for me. So that was really interesting, and now obviously I've been teaching for quite a while, and I've got that down now, and I've got a good kind of order of showing people how to actually get the basics done. And then from there we really take it from the beginning. Really, at the beginning actually it doesn't really matter too much what kind of style you want to play, because I think everybody has to get to grips with the basics. You have to learn how to do some of the basic chord shapes. You have to learn how to play in time and those kind of things like that.
Absolutely, yeah. That's interesting, because I guess that leads on to a pretty good question that I have, is like, where do you find the difficulties in preparing for something like that? Because for me, and I'm sure it's the same for you and a lot of us, it's like, you take for granted the knowledge that you have, and it actually is quite time consuming preparing for a lesson where you're having to be really conscious of the difficulties that there are for someone who's starting out. So where have you found the difficulties in that, in terms of preparing for lessons, in terms of being really conscious of the limitations of whatever student you're teaching?
I mean, at the moment, to be honest, I find that like the beginner lessons, it's the preparation really isn't the big thing.
Okay.
Because I've done it lots of times before now. I have a pretty certain idea of how it's, and I've met lots of different students who all have kind of different needs. So I think there aren't too many sort of questions or anything that kind of throw me off at the beginning now. I think that the real work is actually in the lesson. Because there's a lot of sort of the work is really done in the lesson. There's a lot of kind of hand holding, like in a literal sense. Even sometimes you have to take someone's hand and move their fingers and go, actually it's like this, and you're really trying to identify everything, kind of keep a close eye on them and just try to make sure that they're not kind of developing habits that are perhaps going to be detrimental in the future. I think that's a big thing. You know, yeah, I think that's really a big thing. Is just really being conscious of how someone's playing. And I actually find the more advanced students now, it depends on what it is, of course, the preparation there is there's a lot more preparation because, you know, as you develop as a musician, you start to sort of hone your interest, you start to get a bit more specific about what you're into. And then, you know, for me, then I have to take a look at these things and I have to sit down and I have to either arrange a song for the purpose of a lesson, or perhaps it's not a song that I'm familiar with, so I have to listen to it, I have to learn, I have to have a look at videos and see how the original people are playing it, you know, to really explain it, you know, because I need to know the material well if I'm going to relay that information onto other people. So the preparation really is for the more advanced students in this case. Yeah. I think. What about you? What's been the kind of difficulties for you?
I think for me the most difficult thing has been or is the preparation. It just so happens that most of my students are at the sort of intermediate level. Mm-hmm. And I think each of my students, they vary quite a lot in terms of what they're learning.
Right.
So, for instance, I have a couple of students who are very much geared towards just learning classical repertoire.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the difficulty there is that I have to spend a fair amount of time literally learning the pieces that they want to learn.
Yeah, exactly. You know? Yeah.
So it might be a piece that I haven't ever looked at before, and so, you know, if a student comes to me and they say, oh, I heard this piece or I saw a video of this piece, I'd really like to learn this. They kind of, I think from the student's perspective, they sort of think, this is my teacher, they must know this, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas if you step back, it's like, well, actually, I might not know everything. I need to spend some time preparing, learning the piece,
of course,
playing it properly, but also not just, you know, being able to play it perfectly or whatever, but also identifying the key sort of learning points within that piece of music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
what you need to take away from them.
Yeah, for sure. So I think for me, it's probably the classical lessons are the most demanding in terms of preparations. I think with my students who are more interested in jazz, it's a bit more about, you know, developing their ear, recommending stuff that they can listen to, mm-hmm. Talking about maybe technical things that they can practice.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, I would say the classical students are the most demanding in terms of the time that I need to put into preparing for their lessons.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think that's something that certainly I didn't realize when I was a student and I had my guitar teacher when I was studying at university. I didn't really realize, you know, how much work you had to put into preparing for your various students.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that when you get to people who are more advanced, you know, sometimes, or I think even the majority of cases, the preparation is much longer than the lesson that you give. You know, you may be you may be doing an hour's lesson, you may be being paid for an hour's lesson, but you may be putting in several hours trying to get this piece down. You know, and that's not because it's outside of your technical ability level. It's because, of course, you need to understand the piece, you know, in order to teach it, and you need to sit down and actually, you know, get it sort of memorized and know where it's going. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, and also, in addition to that, you have to be able to be critical of the music that you're studying, and I think this is relative to any type of music that you're teaching.
Sure, yeah.
Is that you have to be able to have a perspective where you can stand back and point out things to the student, like this is a strong learning point of this particular style or piece.
Absolutely.
And on top of that, just being able to, I guess, recommend stuff for them to look at and listen to as well in addition. So you have to kind of do a little bit of background research there as well.
Yeah, I mean, the research is big, for sure. I mean, it's like, because you have to know pieces that include certain techniques as well, you know, as the student kind of progresses, you say, okay, well, I know that I'm going to need to be working on this vibrato or on bending or on hammer-ons or something. So you need to have a good knowledge of pieces that would be good to work on.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of comes with the experience, because now, you know, as I've been teaching for a while, I've kind of got a backlog, I've got a kind of arsenal of pieces that I know are going to be good to show them a particular technique or something that should be worked on, you know.
Exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're right, there is a whole lot of research that kind of goes on behind the scenes, you know.
Yeah, there really is.
Which perhaps people don't always take into consideration.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you're not just teaching them the guitar, but you're sort of helping them find the direction that they want to choose, because it's the same for most instruments, but there is such a variety of music that can be played on the guitar. So I think just having a general knowledge of identifying, oh, this student is really excelling at this particular thing, maybe I could recommend something that they haven't looked at or that I haven't thought of before.
Sure. Yeah, no, exactly, no. And that's kind of why in the beginning I sort of introduced myself as a music teacher, and I tend to refer to myself as a music teacher, because I think it's like what we're doing is, from my perspective at least, what we're doing is we're bringing music to the guitar,
Yes.
The music isn't inside the wood or the strings, and we're trying to kind of get it out, crack some code to sort of extract the music from the guitar. You are learning music on the guitar, via the guitar, and that's something that I try to kind of keep in mind also for myself. But it's that yes, you need to be aware of what's happening in music in general, because I think we talked about this a little bit the other day as well. That guitarists are notoriously bad for kind of being their own entity and not really sort of perhaps getting as into music as a whole as other instruments would. There are lots of guitarists out there who don't read music. I mean, this is probably a big claim, but I'm probably going to go ahead and say that I reckon the majority of guitarists don't read music. I don't have any stats for that.
No. It sounds about right.
There are lots and lots and lots of guitarists that don't read music, and there are lots of people who have just memorized shapes and things. And
absolutely. Yeah.
I think they just kind of they just understand guitar music, and I think when you put them in a setting where it's in a band or something, or you have to play or you have to write for another instrument, then it becomes incredibly difficult, because I think the view up until that point has been very insular. So I think it's very important to look at the wider picture here and see guitar is an instrument that you're playing music on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and absolutely, because I mean there are things that are very specific to the guitar in terms of we have tablature, which doesn't really, I don't think it really exists for any other instrument.
Not that I'm aware
maybe
of.
for other stringed instruments.
Yeah, maybe some folk instruments or something, I'm not sure, but yeah.
But yeah, so you literally have musical devices like tablature, and even just chord diagrams, for example.
Exactly. So visual things to say this is what your hand is looking like when you're doing it, not this is what the music is looking like.
Exactly. So like you, I do try and reinforce that with my students a lot as well, that we're not just learning the guitar here, we're learning how to play music on the guitar.
Sure.
And that poses challenges in itself, but it's massively helpful in the long run. A lot of students that I've encountered, they kind of want shortcuts. They just want to be able to play certain tunes, they want to be able to play certain chords or whatever. And it's I think to myself, and I try and tell them, it's you need to learn about music on the whole as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
It depends on the style. If you want to play blues, you learn things that are idiosyncratic of the blues, and the same can be said for other styles.
Of course. And it's yeah, I see what you mean. And it's kind of also, if you're going to be a blues guitarist and that's all you want to do, and that's your only objective, then you're probably not really going to encounter that many times where you have to be sight reading, or something like that. So there is kind of understanding of that. But no, it's better to teach the broader sort of viewpoint of where you are part of music.
Absolutely, yeah.
What about personally? Anything else? Difficulties of teaching or getting into teaching?
I think we touched upon, we spoke about the preparation is probably the biggest thing, but also just being able to identify habits with different pupils that you have, for instance, because the worst thing you can do, or a really bad thing you can do when you're starting out learning an instrument, is instill a bad habit in your playing. Yeah. Because it takes a lot longer to unlearn it than it does to learn it in the first place. So I guess from my experience with the students that I've had, it's been a case of, for me personally, I've had most of my students have come to me with already an understanding of the guitar and the styles that they want to get into and stuff. So for the most part, it's been ironing out things that they need to correct in terms of their posture, in terms of how their left hand is moving, left hand positioning, right hand positioning, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's definitely is the most prevalent sort of challenge, is trying to correct things. And particularly with my older students, who are very much set in their own ways, that can be a challenge in itself. Trying to say, look, okay, you're reaching a certain point, with the way that you're playing now, but you can get further if you sort of adopt this method, and so on and so forth. So I guess quite a challenge is sort of adapting to your student and recognizing, where they can excel if they change a few things.
What are the best things about teaching? What are the best things that you found for you about teaching?
This is a pretty easy one for me, because I think the best thing with teaching guitar for me, and particularly the students I've had, is it's really forced me to adapt to learn new stuff and to think about music more from like a practical perspective. And I mean, like practice strategies, because I'm sure we all do it, where we give advice, in terms of optimal ways to practice certain things, like, setting up a good routine, including, the important stuff in the routine, like, practicing technical stuff, practicing repertoire, but also expanding your listening repertoire and stuff as well.
Kind of practice routine, yeah.
So yeah, for me, I think definitely the best part, I think the best part is seeing the student progress.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
But I think that's a given. It's like when you can see the enjoyment in your student, and you can see that they're, that they've excelled, or that they've improved through your teaching. I think that's hands down the best part about it.
Absolutely, yeah, I couldn't agree more.
But on a personal perspective, how it's affected me, and the best thing about that is it's definitely been that it's just expanded my knowledge of the instrument itself, of all the possibilities, of all the things that I can learn, and I guess just ways of practicing really well. Because one thing that I try and, which applies to all my students regardless of what they're learning, is they have to have a really strong routine with their practice, a schedule that outlines, everything that you need, that all encompassing stuff to help them get better, and that in turn applies to myself. So I would say I guess it's kind of forced me out of my comfort zone at times, and that's where I've actually seen an improvement in my own playing, which I'm extremely thankful for, because I might not have I might not have seen that if I wasn't teaching someone else.
Yeah, no, true. No, I completely understand.
I don't know if that's similar for you.
Yeah, no, I think for me, like the biggest thing was kind of what you were saying before, is about seeing the progress in the students, and kind of knowing that you've been a part of that, and like kind of just it's quite a privileged position to be like involved in someone's sort of journey. That sounds really cheesy, but it's super true.
Absolutely.
That you're involved in this thing, which you have some students that come and it's not for them, and then they that's fair enough, that's always going to happen. But then again, you sometimes get students who come and then they find that they're really passionate about it, and it's something that becomes a big part of their life, and something that they're interested in, and they do for years to come. And I think just being allowed into that sort of their sort of sphere, and being able to help guide them and help them out with with any sort of questions they may have, I think for me that's really something which is really rewarding, and something which is really quite exciting, and that's definitely the best part of the job, and also just seeing people progress, seeing people get better, and first of all just being happy for them that they're getting better, but also there is a side of it which is like, I was involved in this process of them improving, and that's something that I really try to keep in mind when I am working with people, But it's interesting that you say about kind of practice routine, and I'll say straight away that I completely agree. In order to get good at an instrument, any instrument, or anything really in life, you need to have a good, strong practice routine. That's 100%. There's no doubt about that. As a teacher, I don't think I'm perhaps as sort of sure about imposing that on people. I tell people that if you want to get good, you want to improve, and practice is the only way to do it. I'm quite clear about that. But it also goes back to sort of understanding what people want.
Yeah.
It
depends, right?
Because sometimes I have people who are, in Luxembourg it's a strange sort of, it's not strange, but it's quite specific sort of. You get a lot of people here who have moved here for work.
Yeah.
Perhaps they work in an office. Perhaps they've kind of climbed the corporate ladder, so to speak. They're hardworking, people who are really, once they get a task and they put their mind to it and they're going to work on that and stuff.
Yeah.
So they perhaps come from that sort of kind of culture, and they apply that to the to learning music as well, which is great as well. But you do sometimes get people who are just happy to come along and do something new.
Yeah.
And I would never discourage that as well. That's absolutely fine. If somebody wants it, that they come along and they have an hour's worth of practice, and that's the only time that week that they play guitar. I'm clear with them. I say, you're not going to make anywhere near as much progress if this is the only time you're playing guitar. But if that's what you want to do, if that's your time out, your break, to come and have a bit of fun and make a bit of a bit of noise with someone who's knows what they're doing, then absolutely that's fine.
Yeah.
I think it's about understanding what people want to do.
That's a very good point, because you are, I guess, you're quite responsible for what for that person's experience in terms of how they're learning.
Yeah.
I personally haven't really experienced that kind of student as of yet, where I feel like a lot of my students have come to me and they said, I really want to improve. I've got the time that I can put into this. How can you help me?
Yeah.
Get better at this thing. Which is great and everything, but I guess that's another question that I wanted to ask you is, because we are quite responsible for this student's progress, and with that can come a little bit of pressure, because you want to make sure it's the best learning environment for them, whatever context it is, whatever goals that they have. So, and I guess it's not really talked about, or it's not really mentioned as much with regards from the student's perspective, but a lot of time has to go into that as well, not just preparing what you're literally going to look at in a lesson, but also to ensure that you're sort of adapting to that student in the right way, so that you're making their learning experience as optimal for them as possible.
I mean, the interesting thing is, when I started doing this sort of work, I was of the mindset, I'm going to be a music teacher, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to teach people music, and that's going to be the bulk of it, which it is. There's obviously that is the general idea, but actually so much of the job is learning about people, learning about specific personalities, understanding people, which is funny, because that's not something I've ever associated with myself as being a particularly strong trait that I've had, but it's actually really a really interesting part of the work, is because no two people are the same, and people have their own different lives and their own different ways of thinking about things. And actually, as you start to build this relationship, particularly if you've been with someone for quite a long time, you start to know how they work.
Yeah.
Do they need to be pushed? Or is pushing them going to push them away? Is that going to make them discouraged? Do they need a bit more encouragement than most? I'm never going to tell someone that they're amazing when they're not playing well, for sure. But it's good to praise people when they are doing things, and some people need more of that. Do people need to have sort of, as you say before, strict routines where they get set homework, they do that over the week, and they bring it in, and we discuss that? Or is it a bit more of I'm going to show you these are the general idea, and then you do your thing with it? So it's really about learning how to interact with people.
Yeah.
And then, while also, from my perspective, maintaining some sort of, being genuine to my teaching style as well, because there's lots and lots of different ways of teaching, So it's trying to find a balance between the two, tailoring things for specific needs, for specific identities, but also making sure that my identity as a teacher is also sort of prevalent, And I think I've got a good balance now. But certainly when I was that's something that I've had to work out.
Yeah.
Is just people skills. Really, that's really the main thing is people skills. Because motivation is just such a key thing. It's huge. I'm 100% sure that every student I have or ever will have can learn the guitar. That's something that you won't persuade me otherwise for. But they won't do it if they're not motivated. And some people need a lot more help with the motivation. They need to be encouraged. Everyone needs to be encouraged, of course, but some people really need to be encouraged.
Yeah. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with it if you? I don't know if you've had this. I've experienced it myself, where a student, they're not progressing. Every week we go over the same stuff, and they're still really interested in it and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's clear that they just are not. They do have the time, but it's clear that they're not putting in the time. And you're trying to be nice about it. You're trying to say, look, you be understanding and everything.
Sure.
But I guess how do you deal with, like, if you've had this where a student isn't progressing and it's not because of the style of your teaching or
Sure.
the lack of your effort. It's they're, because it comes to a point where you kind of have to say, like, look, if you want to do this, there are certain things that you have to change or you have to improve on.
But that's what you have to say. I mean, I think from what I've kind of found out, there's no other way about it.
Yeah.
You have to ask questions and see what's happening. But if it is the case that they're saying, oh, well, I'm not making any progress with this, is really putting me off, and you find out, well, are you practicing? Are you putting in? Because that's why I said kind of before, you have to be clear about it, that the people who get better are the people who practice.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no way around that.
There's no shortcuts.
I wish there was, I wish there was sometimes some magical thing I can say, or arrange a piece where it's super easy but sounds exactly the same. But there's not. It's work. Like anything, if you want to get good at it, you have to put in the hours, and there's absolutely no way of changing that. I think the important thing in that situation there is finding out why. Why aren't they doing it? If it is the case that they have lots of time, but they just don't want to, then we're in a whole nother thing. Because if you don't want to, then what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Is it a case that they need something from you to motivate them? If I can do that, then I'll absolutely try. But fundamentally, this needs to come from you. You need to be willing. You need to be motivated, and you need to have patience. That's really a big thing. Patience. You can't. It's not going to happen overnight, and that's something that I'm really quite clear of in the beginning as well. When you sit down and you discuss your sort of path, that if you're expecting this to be a thing that you can just learn and then you do, that's not. It's a process. It's a process that's probably going to take you a long time. And that's something that I don't paint as like something to get over, a hurdle. I don't paint it as like this is going to take you ages. It's more like, this is great, this is a process, this is something that you can continue learning for forever if you wanted to. There's always going to be things to learn.
I think, because I've had a student like this, and what I always try and remind them is, they often feel, oh no, they don't often, but with this student, he wasn't really progressing that much, and he had come to me specifically because he wanted to learn a particular type of thing.
Okay.
And for a while, the lessons went really well, and he was making good progress and everything, but he kind of like plateaued a little bit. And the thing was, he was doubting himself, and that was the main issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And
I think, just to sort of add further to your point, it really is about, obviously you don't want to, you want to be encouraging your students all the time. That's the quite a key thing. And with this student that I had, it was almost like he was doubting himself, and for that reason he kind of hit a wall a little bit and didn't feel like he was progressing.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we worked it out was, we just sort of took a step back, and we sort of highlighted the fact that he had progressed, quite a lot over the time that we've been working together. Yeah, exactly. I think
if you're just looking ahead, you don't really look back and see kind of how far you've come.
Yeah, from a student's perspective, because I always had this when I was, and I still have this a lot, with my own practice and learning. It's like we often don't see, the extent of our progress because we're either comparing ourselves with someone else or, we're not hitting these unreasonable targets that we set ourselves.
Absolutely.
So a lot of the time, that can be the case. And with the student that I had, he was really starting to doubt himself, and we just took a step back. We sort of worked on stuff that was a little bit different, and he realized, like, oh my God, I've actually come a really long way.
Sure.
And so it literally came down to, everything was in his head, and he'd convinced himself, I can't do this, I can't progress any further. We took a step back, we looked at some different stuff, it shed a whole new light in it, and then his passion was like rejuvenated. And
well, that's great.
from there he made a lot more progress. But it can be difficult, from the teacher's perspective. You have to be very sensitive with students a lot of the time.
Sure.
Depending on what it is they're learning, and you can't be too easy on them, but you can't be too critical on them either. So it's a very fine balancing act.
It's true.
And this is the same for whatever you're learning, because I think you always have to encourage, but at the same time you have to set reasonable goals, realistic targets, and that can be a challenge of teaching itself, because you don't want to teach something that's too difficult for someone, because
that will just put them off. Exactly.
And likewise, if you teach something that's too easy, then they feel like, oh, well, what's the point of this?
Why do I need a teacher, or why am I doing this? It's true.
So that can be that can be a tricky thing to navigate sometimes. True.
But I think that confidence thing is massive, particularly just in music or in lots of subjects. But particularly as we're discussing music, I think that's huge. Even I think from a teacher's perspective, particularly when I started doing this, there was that thought of like, oh, who am I to teach? Like
of course. Yeah.
And I think I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if it's like it's that strange standard. I don't know if it's like a societal thing or if it's a personal thing, but you kind of say like, oh, do I think I'm the best at this? Which is a strange way of looking at it, and I've since obviously realised that that's nonsense. I'm definitely not saying I'm the best at all. I've never said that. I would say that. But I think there is this strange standard which is applied. When you tell someone you're working in education, particularly in sort of art, music education, you go like, oh, but are you that good? Are you the best at this? And I think it's I think it's a bit like, I don't know. Think of like any teacher you've ever had. Even if like I don't know, maybe you had some private lessons in something, or you've had a driving instructor, or I don't know. Even thinking back to kind of teachers that you've had in school. For example, you think of your maths teacher. We went to different schools, but I don't know who your maths teacher is. But if I asked you, do you think your maths teacher was the best at maths? I can tell you right now that he wasn't. I don't know who he was, but no, he definitely wasn't. He probably he wasn't even the best in his town. He may not have even been best in the neighborhood. But what he was, hopefully. Was someone who had a really strong understanding of the theory and practice of the subject, and if you're lucky, he was someone who was able to relay that information onto you and perhaps inspire people, to be motivated and to better themselves. And I think that's something, that is what the role of teaching is.
It's an interesting topic because, and it's absolutely true. From as yourself as a teacher, from your perspective, you have to be humble, but you have to be confident at the same time, and that's those are two very difficult things to balance out, because obviously we're not the best at what we do, because there's who is? There are very few people.
What does that even mean?
There's only a few people who are the best, right?
Sure.
But it's very interesting, because I would say that's probably one of the biggest challenges for my teaching is having the confidence in myself, believing in myself that I can teach this stuff, to the right level, but not being overconfident either, because you have to retain some, level of humility in terms of, you know, I might not be the best, but if I can communicate, you know, the knowledge that I have
Yeah.
to whoever I'm teaching in an effective way, that's
Yeah.
the most important thing. Because at the end of the day,
it is, you know,
even if you're not the best, you're still, like you said, you've studied the specific area you're teaching in. So you have to, I'd say that's quite a big challenge, I'm sure, for all of us, is that we doubt ourselves a little bit at the time, because we are responsible for this person's learning.
Of course,
you know?
It's not something to take lightly, you know.
So it's an interesting topic, and at times I've even thought to myself, like, oh, should I even be, you know, who am I to teach these people?
Yeah, absolutely, it's normal.
And you have to take a step back, and it's like, okay, I might not be the best of the best, but, you know, I'm capable of teaching, you know, these people. You know, I know stuff that they don't know yet.
Yeah,
and
of course.
That's the key thing.
That's exactly the thing. And you know, I completely agree. You know, and I think, you know, as it's kind of said in the past, you know, there's absolutely no shame in saying no as well. You know? If somebody, you know, you have to know what you do, you have to be confident in what you do. But I'm not going to lie. You know, I'm never going to put myself out there. And if someone comes to me and says, you know, oh, I've been playing classical guitar for several years, I want to learn these kind of quite advanced pieces, I would say no, that's not something I can do. I play some classical guitar and I can absolutely teach you basic stuff, but that's I'm not an advanced classical guitarist, and that's not something I can teach you. You know, and there's no shame. That doesn't detract from what I do. You know, nor should it. You know,
I think that's been the biggest hurdle for me in my teaching, is that sometimes I literally haven't had the confidence to be like, yes, I can teach you. Because, you know, particularly if it's a student who's quite far along.
Right.
You know, I do have a few intermediate students now. It is quite a challenge, but there have been some people where I've said, I'm sorry, but, you know, you're better off going somewhere else, because I'm not the best option for you. And I think that's
the thing.
That's fine as well.
No, it's even the best thing, because you need to keep in mind what's best for the student.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. You know, I had some children before that I was teaching, who then they were offered a place at the conservatoire, you know, so they stopped with my services and obviously went there, and fine, you do that, you know.
Yeah.
That place can offer you things that I can't, you know, absolutely. You know, you'll get a great standard of teaching, you'll have access. I don't work for the conservatoire, I'm not trying to advertise it, but you know what I mean, they'll have access to facilities and a whole load of things that they won't get from me. So it's like, yeah, absolutely. You know, we want to be looking out for what the best interest. We want to be looking out for the best interest of the student, and that's important as well. But don't undersell yourself.
Yeah, because on the flip side, like, you're extremely knowledgeable in with a certain set of skills.
Sure.
So, you know, there's things that, you know, like another sort of educating environment might not be able to provide. That's something that you can.
Yeah,
you know, much
exactly.
more personal sort of relationship with the student in terms of, you know, their specific goals. And, you know, you also, you know, when you, I don't know if you've had this as well, but like some of the students that I've had for quite a long time now, they're so much more comfortable playing in front of me now. And I remember there was one student that I had, and when we first started lessons, he'd be playing whatever he'd been practicing in front of me, and I could tell that he wasn't playing to his pure, you know, his absolute potential.
Right.
And it's always the case where, you know, when we're practicing in our room, we play way better than anywhere else.
As long as no one's listening, then you're like, it's true.
But I think that's a really important point as well, because, you know, you can develop a sort of like a comfortable relationship with the student or with your teacher, where you feel confident to be able to play to your best ability, and that's where the lessons become the most successful, because then you can really delve into, like, they're playing as well as they can, so you can delve more into, like, the finer details of things.
Exactly.
Whereas if you have a student who's not confident playing in front of you or whatever, you're not really you can't really, you know, approach the same issues, because you're having to sort of, I don't know, it's almost like you're playing catch up with the material that you're working on, you know. So
I mean, I wonder kind of where that comes from as well. I wonder if it's like, because you see a lot of people like that who kind of, I know it's normal to get nervous in front of people, absolutely. But there are some people who kind of feel, I think maybe they've just sort of been, I'm not going to use the word indoctrinated, but like for perhaps the way of teaching in schools, you know, where they were sort of punished for not doing well. I don't know if you've sort of experienced this, people quite often, apologize to me, like, "Oh, I'm so sorry that I made this mistake." It's like, that's why we're here,
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I'm here to help you do that. I'm not. This is not an audition.
Yeah, exactly.
Not expecting this flawless piece of music.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think, yeah, like you say, it's the students' expectations, and also the fact that I remember when I was doing lessons at uni, I would get really nervous before my lessons, man. Like, and it was, when I look back on it now, it was kind of ridiculous because obviously your teacher is there to help you.
Mm-hmm.
But I would feel like, oh my god, like, am I prepared enough?
Right.
Like, and then I'd get into the lesson and we'd be going over stuff, and I just,
Mm-hmm.
my palms were sweaty, and
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't really, I knew I could play it, but at the time I just couldn't. And it's almost, I think, if I think about it, it's because you look up to your teacher, no matter,
Sure.
what the context is. Well, it depends on the student. But if you're passionate about learning, like guitar, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and you go to your lesson and you sort out this teacher
Mm-hmm.
who you know is like really good at whatever you want to learn,
Sure.
you obviously look up to them, so you want to,
Yeah, you're there because
there's this inherent sort of like, oh, I want to play well for them or whatever,
Right,
which
okay.
shouldn't really be the case, but it is.
Mhm.
It just so happens that it is. So, and just to go back to the point I made earlier, that's why I think, the way that we teach, one-to-one tuition, weekly or every other week sort of lessons is
Mhm.
so successful because the student becomes more and more comfortable with you,
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of nervousness sort of dies away after
Yeah.
a little while.
Exactly. I mean, it's about, like, kind of, as I said before, building that relationship with them. Once you know someone better, you get more comfortable with them. You can, some people, that you can kind of joke around with them and
Yeah.
things, and create like an atmosphere which is, comfortable. And people do improve in those settings for sure.
Mm.
But yeah, you're right. Whenever you're playing in front of someone, that's
crazy,
all, it
isn't it?
changes it. It changes the dynamic completely. It's really interesting.
Mm.
I'm sure there must have been some studies done into that before in the past.
I'm sure it applies to like most things.
I must have,
most,
of course.
most fields,
Just, I think we're
whatever,
just involved in
whatever
this.
you're working on.
Exactly, yeah. That's why you always have, presentation skills or whatever. Public speaking is always something that people fear, and it's kind of a similar thing, isn't it? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Well, anything else to add?
We've covered quite a few
It's
topics.
been
Hopefully this has been a enlightening thing for some listeners.
Yeah,
just to hear
hopefully.
our perspectives, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah, hopefully there'll be some stuff that people can take away from it. If you are interested in teaching, then absolutely. Hopefully this has kind of been of some use to you. And yeah, well, I got to go prepare for some some lessons today.
Yeah,
anyway,
speaking of them.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions or any comments or anything, just send us a message on Facebook, on social media, whatever. And see you next time.
See you next time, guys.
Thanks.